What if one single moment of defiance could change your life forever? For Catherine Sharma, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and family medical bills, that moment came on a dreary Tuesday. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just trying to get through her shift at a high-end restaurant where the wealthy clientele barely saw her as human. But when a frail, elderly man was about to be thrown out simply for his appearance, something inside Catherine snapped. She took a stand, sacrificing the one thing she couldn't afford to lose: her job. Little did she know her customer was no ordinary man, and her life was about to become an unbelievable real-life drama. The air in the Gilded Spoon always felt thin, as if the sheer cost of the entrees had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was a place of hushed tones, the clinking of heavy silverware on bone china, and the silent, judgmental gazes of people who believed their net worth was directly proportional to their importance. For Catherine Kate Sharma, it was a stage where she played the part of an invisible servant for 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. At 24, she felt 100. The relentless fatigue was etched into the fine lines forming around her eyes, a map of sleepless nights and gnawing anxiety. Each morning, before pinning on her name tag and forcing a smile that never quite reached her eyes, she would check the balance of her bank account. The number was always cruelly small, a digital mockery of her efforts. Most of her meager earnings went towards the rent on a cramped 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger brother Sam, and the rest was a frantic triage of bills and groceries. The biggest black hole, the one that swallowed her hope, was the cost of Sam's medication. He had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder 2 years ago, and the experimental treatments that kept him stable were astronomically expensive. Their insurance, a flimsy plan with a deductible that might as well have been $1 million, was a joke. So Kate worked. She picked up every extra shift she endured the condescending patrons and the demanding management, and she pasted on that smile. The Gilded Spoon was managed by a man named Gregory Vance. Gregory was a man who had ironed the personality out of his shirts and the compassion out of his soul. He was tall, thin, and moved with a reptilian smoothness that made everyone's skin crawl. He worshipped at the altar of wealth, genuflecting to anyone with a platinum credit card and a recognizable surname. To Gregory, the staff were not people. They were cogs in his meticulously polished machine, easily replaceable and utterly disposable. He had a particular disdain for Kate, whose quiet defiance and refusal to engage in the sycophantic gossip of the other servers seemed to offend his sense of order. This particular Tuesday was grayer than most. A persistent drizzle slicked the streets of Oakhaven, and the restaurant was filled with a subdued but entitled lunchtime crowd. Kate moved through the tables with an practiced grace, her mind a running ledger of orders, allergies, and table numbers. Table 7 needed more water. Table 3's steak was to be medium rare and not a shade over dear. Table 9, a quartet of women who spoke of their husbands' portfolios in bored monotones, had been waving their empty wine glasses for at least 2 minutes. It was in the middle of this carefully orchestrated chaos that he walked in. He was old, perhaps in his late 70s or early 80s, with a cloud of untamed white hair and a face that was a roadmap of a long, hard life. He wore a tweed coat that had seen better decades, its elbows patched with worn leather, and a pair of scuffed brown boots. He carried no briefcase, no designer shopping bags, just a palpable air of weariness. He stood hesitantly by the maître d' stand, looking entirely out of place like a sparrow that had wandered into a cage of peacocks. The maître d', a young man named Paul, who was perpetually terrified of Gregory, looked at the old man with a mixture of pity and panic. "May I help you?" Sir Paul asked, his voice a little too loud. At table, the old man said, his voice raspy but clear. "For one." Do you have a reservation? No, I'm afraid not. From across the room, Gregory's eyes narrowed. He began to glide towards the entrance, his posture rigid with disapproval. Kate, who was just dropping off a check at a nearby table, felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She knew that look. It was Gregory's undesirable element look. "I'm sorry," Sir Paul stammered, his eyes darting towards his approaching boss. "We are fully booked for the lunch service." It was a blatant lie. Kate could see at least 3 empty two-tops, including the small, slightly wobbly one in the corner by the window, the one they always gave to walk-ins they deemed unimportant. The old man simply nodded his shoulders, slumping slightly. He didn't argue or cause a scene. He just looked tired. A deep, soul-level tired that Kate understood all too well. He turned to leave his slow, shuffling gait, a stark contrast to the brisk, self-important strides of the other patrons. And in that moment, something in Kate shifted. It wasn't a grand, heroic impulse. It was a small, sharp pang of empathy. She saw her own grandfather in his stooped posture. She saw the countless invisible people, the ones who are judged and dismissed before they even speak, the ones who, like her, were just trying to find a small, warm place in a cold world. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. "Wait!" She called out, her voice firmer than she intended. The old man paused, turning his head. Gregory froze mid-stride, his face darkening with fury. Paul looked at Kate as if she had just sprouted a second head. "There's a table," Kate said, gesturing to the empty corner spot. "Table 12. It's free. I can seat you there." The old man's eyes, a surprisingly sharp and intelligent blue, met hers. For a moment, a flicker of something surprised gratitude passed across his weathered features. Gregory was beside her. In an instant, his voice, a venomous hiss in her ear. "Ms. Sharma, what in God's name do you think you're doing? My job." Kate replied, her gaze still on the old man. She refused to look at Gregory, refused to let him see the tremor in her hands. "Serving customers. He's a customer." Gregory sneered, his voice, dropping low so only she could hear, "is a vagrant who wandered in off the street. He will lower the tone of the entire establishment. Get him out. Now." A cold fury, sharp and clean, cut through Kate's exhaustion. All the indignities, the silent slights, the feeling of being a disposable cog in a machine, it all coalesced into a single point of resistance. She looked directly at Gregory, her chin held high. "No," she said the word small but solid. "I'm not going to do that." The standoff lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The hushed chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade away. It was Kate, the weary waitress, Gregory, the furious manager, and the old man, a silent witness to a battle being waged on his behalf. The old man looked from Gregory's contorted face to Kate's defiant one, his expression unreadable. Gregory's face went from red to a pale, tight-lipped white. "You are on very thin ice, Ms. Sharma," he whispered, his words dripping with menace. He then turned his back on her, plastering a grotesquely charming smile on his face as he addressed the old man. "Sir, my apologies for the confusion from my staff," he said, shooting a look of pure hatred at Kate. "Unfortunately, that table is also reserved. A regular is due any moment. Perhaps I can recommend a lovely little cafe down the street." The old man didn't even look at Gregory. His gaze remained fixed on Kate. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, not of agreement with the manager, but of acknowledgement to her. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the drizzle, swallowing him up as the heavy oak door swung shut. The silence he left behind was deafening. Gregory turned to Kate, his fake smile gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated rage. "My office," he seethed. Now. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what was coming, but as she followed Gregory's rigid back towards the small windowless office at the back of the restaurant, a strange sense of calm settled over her. She might have just lost everything, but for the first time in a very long time, she hadn't lost a piece of herself. She had drawn a line. The consequences were coming, but she would face them standing up. The door to Gregory's office clicked shut behind Kate, the sound unnervingly final. The room was as sterile and joyless as the man himself. A large mahogany desk, obsessively neat, dominated the space. The only personal touch was a framed photograph of Gregory, shaking hands with a local real estate mogul, his smile wide and predatory. He didn't invite Kate to sit. He stood behind his desk, his hands clasped behind his back, pacing like a caged panther. "Explain yourself." He began, his voice deceptively calm. It was the tone he used right before an explosion, a gathering of storm clouds. Kate stood her ground, her hands clasped in front of her to still their shaking. "I saw an empty table and a customer who wanted to be seated. I thought I was supposed to help him." "You thought?" Gregory scoffed, spinning around to face her. "You are not paid to think, Miss Sharma. You are paid to follow instructions. Your instruction, had you bothered to use your eyes, was to observe your maître d'hôte and myself handling the situation. We have standards, a certain ambiance to maintain. An ambiance that doesn't include the elderly or people who aren't wearing designer clothes." Kate shot back the words, tasting like acid and freedom. Gregory's eyes blazed. An ambiance that doesn't include people who look like they're about to ask for a handout instead of ordering the lobster thermidor our patrons pay for an experience. They pay for exclusivity. They do not pay to be seated next to that. He was a person, Kate insisted, her voice rising slightly. He wasn't bothering anyone. He just wanted a meal. We had an empty table. It was wrong to turn him away based on how he looked. Wrong. Gregory laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Let me tell you what's wrong, Kate. What's wrong is a subordinate openly defying her manager in the middle of the dining room. What's wrong is you jeopardizing our reputation because of your bleeding heart sentimentality. Do you have any idea who was sitting at table 5, Victoria Davenport? Her husband practically owns half the financial district. She saw the whole thing. She looked positively appalled. The mention of Victoria Davenport made Kate's stomach churn. Mrs. Davenport was a regular, a woman whose face was pulled into a permanent expression of distaste. She treated the staff as if they were inconvenient furniture, and her complaints were legendary. She was exactly the kind of person Gregory would sacrifice his grandmother to please. Mrs. Davenport is appalled by the quality of the breadsticks. If they aren't warmed to her exact specifications, Kate muttered under her breath. "What was that?" Gregory barked. "Nothing," Kate said louder. "I just think it's a sad state of affairs when we value the comfort of a woman like that over the basic dignity of another human being." "Dignity?" Gregory slammed his hand down on the desk, rattling the penholder. The sudden noise made Kate flinch. "Dignity doesn't pay our bills. Dignity doesn't get us a mention in Oakhaven-style magazine, Mrs. Davenport's husband's corporate account, however does. You are naive, idealistic, and frankly, you're a liability." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk, his face inches from hers. His cologne was overpowering, a cloying, expensive scent that smelled of ambition. "I gave you a chance. I told you to get him out. All you had to do was nod and walk away. But you couldn't do that, could you? You had to make your little stand." Kate's mind flashed to Sam, to the stack of unpaid medical bills on her kitchen counter, to the gnawing fear that was her constant companion. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should apologize, grovel promise, It would never happen again. Her survival depended on this job. But then she remembered the old man's eyes, the quiet acceptance of dismissal, the brief flicker of surprise when she had spoken up for him. She had done the right thing, and if the price of doing the right thing was this job, then the job wasn't worth having. The thought was terrifying and liberating all at once. He deserved to be treated with respect. She said, her voice quiet, but unyielding. Everyone does. I'm not sorry I did it. Gregory stared at her, his lips curled into a sneer of disbelief. He pushed himself away from the desk and walked to the door, his movements stiff with anger. He opened it. Then I'm not sorry to do this, he said, his voice ringing with cold triumph. You're fired, Ms. Sharma. Effective immediately. Collect your things from your locker and get out of my restaurant. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Fired. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. It was one thing to know it was coming, another to have it happen. The panic she had been holding at bay crashed over her in a suffocating wave. Sam, the rent, the medicine. Gregory, please. She heard herself say the defiance, draining out of her, replaced by raw desperation. I need this job. You should have thought of that before you decided to become a social justice warrior on company time. He said, his face a mask of indifference. He gestured out the door. Paul will escort you to the staff room. I want you off the premises in 5 minutes. Numbly, Kate walked past him out of the office and into the bustling back corridor of the restaurant. The sounds of the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the sizzle of the grill, the shouts of the chefs seemed to come from a great distance. Paul, the young maître d', was waiting for her, his face pale and his eyes full of pity. Kate, I'm so sorry, he whispered as they walked towards the lockers. He's a monster. It's okay, Paul. You would have been fired if you'd seated him, she said, her voice hollow. She opened her locker, the metal door groaning in protest. Inside was her worn-out purse, a half-eaten granola bar, and a paperback novel with a creased spine. She pulled out her things, her movements stiff and robotic. A few of the other servers, Maria and Ben, saw what was happening. They approached cautiously, their faces etched with concern. He really fired you? Maria asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Over that old man, Kate just nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in her throat. That's insane, Ben said, shaking his head. We all saw it. You did the right thing. Their support was a small, warm ember in the cold dread that was filling her. But it wouldn't pay the rent. As Paul escorted her towards the back exit, the one used for trash and deliveries, she had to pass the main dining room one last time. Through the swinging door, she caught a glimpse of the scene. Gregory was fawning over Victoria Davenport's table, his posture obsequious, his smile dripping with insincerity. Mrs. Davenport was laughing at something he said, a shrill, unpleasant sound. Life in the Gilded Spoon was going on without her, as if she had never been there at all. The back door opened onto a grimy alley that smelled of stale grease and damp concrete. The drizzle had turned into a steady, miserable rain. Kate pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself, but it did little to ward off the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She didn't have money for a cab, so she started the long walk to the bus stop, the cold rain plastering her hair to her face. Each step was heavy with the weight of her new reality. Fired. Unemployed. How was she going to tell Sam? How was she going to afford his next prescription? Refill. She had stood up for her principles, drawn a line in the sand against injustice. But as the grey, unforgiving city swallowed her up, all she could feel was the crushing, terrifying cost of her conviction. She had won a moral victory, but it felt an awful lot like losing everything. The bus ride home was a blur of rain-streaked windows and the indifferent faces of strangers. Each lurch and squeal of the brakes seemed to mock the chaos swirling inside Kate's head. The word "fired" echoed with the rhythm of the wheels on the wet pavement. Fired. 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 By the time she reached her stop, the cheap fabric of her waitress uniform was soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second, colder layer of dread. Her apartment building was a tired 4-story brick structure with cracking paint and a perpetually broken intercom. The smell of boiled cabbage and old dust clung to the stairwell. As she climbed the 3 flights to her unit, her legs felt like lead. The key trembled in her hand as she unlocked the door, the sound of it scraping in the lock feeling like an intrusion on the fragile peace within. "Kate, is that you? You're home early." Sam's voice came from the living room. He was sitting on their lumpy second-hand sofa, a blanket tucked around his legs and a textbook open on his lap. At 19, he had their mother's dark, thoughtful eyes, and a quick wit that the illness hadn't managed to dull. But the disease had stolen his energy, replacing the vibrant athleticism he once had with a constant, weary pallor. Seeing him so determined to keep up with his online college courses, despite it all sent a fresh wave of panic through Kate. "Hey," she said, forcing a weak smile as she shrugged off her damp jacket. Shift ended early. Slow day. It was a feeble lie, and she knew he saw right through it. Sam had a sixth sense for her moods, an emotional barometer, finely tuned by years of shared struggle. Slow day or Gregory was being a world-class jerk. Day, he asked, setting his book aside. His gaze was sharp, concerned. Kate's composure crumbled. She sank into the worn armchair opposite him, the fight finally going out of her. The tears she had been holding back since the alleyway began to sting her eyes. "He fired me, Sam." She whispered the words barely audible. Sam's face fell. The playful concern vanished, replaced by a gravity that made him look older than his years. What happened, leaning forward, her head in her hands. Kate recounted the whole sorry tale, the old man, Gregory's command, Victoria Davenport's smug satisfaction, her own stubborn refusal to back down. As she spoke, the story felt both profoundly significant and utterly foolish. A grand gesture that had resulted in nothing but her own unemployment. When she finished, Sam was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. She expected him to be angry to tell her she couldn't afford to have principles. She was braced for the practical, devastating truth of what she had done to them. Instead, he reached out and squeezed her arm. "I'm proud of you, Kate," he said softly. The tears finally spilled over hot and fast. Proud, she choked out, looking up at him in disbelief. "Sam, how are we going to pay for your meds next month? How are we going to make rent? I was so stupid." "No," he said firmly. "You weren't stupid. You were you. You've always stood up for people. You did it for me with those doctors who wanted to give up, and you did it for that old man today. That's not something to be ashamed of. We'll figure it out. We always do." His faith in her was both a comfort and a terrible burden. "We always do" had always meant she always figured it out. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than ever. Meanwhile, back at the Gilded Spoon, Kate's sudden departure had left a ripple. Gregory had stormed back into the dining room, his face flushed with victory, only to find a strange atmosphere. The staff moved with a sullen, resentful energy. Maria, her most experienced server, after Kate was pointedly avoiding his gaze. Ben was slamming plates down in the kitchen with a little more force than necessary. Even more troubling was the reaction from a few of the patrons. Mr. Henderson, a quiet history professor, who ate lunch at the same corner table twice a week, the very table Kate had tried to give the old man, had witnessed the entire exchange. As Gregory passed his table, Henderson cleared his throat. "Excuse me, manager," he said, his voice mild but firm. "Mr. Henderson, everything to your liking." Gregory beamed instantly, shifting into his ingratiating mode. "Not entirely," the professor said, folding his napkin. "I have been coming here for 3 years. The food is adequate, but the primary reason I return is the service, specifically the service provided by the young woman you just fired." Gregory's smile faltered. Ms. Sharma was not meeting our standards of conduct. On the contrary, Henderson continued, his eyes glinting behind his spectacles. "I believe her conduct was the only thing of any real standard I witnessed today. She showed compassion. You, on the other hand, showed a rather ugly deference to wealth and a cruel disdain for a fellow human being. It was quite distasteful. It has, in fact, entirely ruined my appetite." With that, Professor Henderson placed enough cash on the table to cover his half-eaten sandwich and stood up. "I won't be returning," he said simply, and walked out, leaving a stunned Gregory in his wake. The dismissal from a minor regular was a pinprick, but it planted a seed of unease in Gregory's mind. He had asserted his authority, yes. He had pleased Victoria Davenport, who had left him an ostentatiously large tip, but the smooth, perfect machine of his restaurant felt slightly out of sync. He dismissed the feeling as residual annoyance. He'd hire a new waitress tomorrow. Someone younger, more desperate, and less inclined to have a conscience. Kate Sharma would be forgotten in a day. For Kate, the next few days were a grey montage of despair. She scoured online job boards, the cursor, blinking mockingly on the screen. Waitress wanted. Hostess needed. Each one was a reminder of what she'd lost. She applied for dozens of positions, from diners to coffee shops to hotel restaurants, her resume now tainted with the fact that she had been terminated. The letter for Sam's prescription refill arrived in the mail, a stark white envelope containing a bill that made her feel physically ill. She hid it from him, tucking it into a drawer with the other unpaid bills, a growing pile of paper that represented her failure. She smiled, she cooked, she assured Sam they would be fine, all while a silent scream echoed in her soul. She thought often of the old man. Who was he? Was he okay? Had he found somewhere warm to eat? A part of her resented him, this anonymous catalyst for her ruin. Another deeper part of her knew he wasn't to blame. The blame lay with people like Gregory, with a system that prized appearance over substance. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had sacrificed her entire world for a ghost, a nameless, faceless man who had disappeared back into the rain, utterly oblivious to the wreckage he had left behind. Her one act of defiance felt less like a stand and more like a foolish, impulsive leap into an abyss. And as the days bled into a week, the abyss only seemed to get deeper. Exactly 1 week after the world had fallen out from under her, the letter arrived. It was delivered not by the regular mailman, but by a courier in a sharp, dark uniform who required her signature on a digital pat. The envelope itself was an object of intimidating quality. It was made of thick, cream-colored cardstock, heavy in her hand. In the top left corner, embossed in a discreet but regal gold font, were 2 words, Pendleton Global. Kate's heart gave a nervous flutter. Pendleton Global was a behemoth, a titan of industry, with its fingers in everything from technology and sustainable energy to real estate and philanthropy. Its headquarters, the iconic Pendleton Tower, was the gleaming centerpiece of Oak Haven's skyline, a monument to unimaginable wealth and power. What could they possibly want with her? Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Her second, more paranoid thought was that Victoria Davenport's husband was somehow connected to the company, and this was some sort of legal threat, a cease and desist for offending his wife. With trembling fingers, she slit open the envelope. The letter inside was as elegantly austere as the exterior. Dear Miss Catherine Sharma, you are cordially requested to attend a meeting with Mr. Arthur Pendleton on Friday, August 22nd at 10:00 a.m. The meeting will be held at Pendleton Tower, Man Pendleton Plaza, 50th floor. A car will be sent to your residence at 9:15 a.m. to escort you. We look forward to your attendance. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance, Executive Assistant to Mr. Pendleton, Kate, read the letter 3 times. Arthur Pendleton. The Arthur Pendleton, the founder and CEO of the entire empire. He was a legendary recluse. He hadn't given a public interview in over a decade. His photograph rarely appeared in the press, and when it did, it was usually a grainy shot from 20 years ago. He was more of a myth than a man, a ghost in the corporate machine. And he wanted to meet her. Sam, come look at this, she called out, her voice thin with disbelief. Sam hobbled over from the kitchen, leaning on the doorframe. He read the letter over her shoulder, his eyebrows climbing towards his hairline. Pendleton Global. As in the Pendleton, he breathed. This has to be a joke, or a scam. It was delivered by a professional courier. Kate said, her mind racing. Look at the paper. This isn't something you print at home. She then noticed the name at the bottom. Eleanor Vance. Vance? Do you think she's related to Gregory? It's not an uncommon name, Sam reasoned. But wow, what a coincidence if she is. What do you think this is about? I have no idea, Kate confessed, sinking onto the sofa. It makes no sense. Maybe they're doing some kind of random community focus group. But why me specifically? And why send a car? The mystery consumed her for the next 2 days. She alternated between wild speculation and paralyzing anxiety. What if it was a job interview for a low-level position she had applied to so many places? Maybe her resume had somehow been flagged in their system. But that didn't explain the personal invitation from the CEO himself. On Friday morning, Kate was a bundle of nerves. She spent an hour trying to decide what to wear, finally settling on her one good pair of black slacks and a simple conservative blouse, the outfit she used to wear for job interviews in a life before the Gilded Spoon. It felt woefully inadequate for a meeting in a billionaire's skyscraper. At precisely 9:15 a.m., a sleek black sedan, the kind she had only ever seen in movies, purred to a stop in front of her run-down apartment building. The driver, a man in a crisp suit and cap, got out and opened the rear door for her. His expression impassive. The car's immaculate presence on their shabby street felt surreal, drawing curious stares from her neighbors. The ride downtown was silent and smooth. Kate stared out the window at the city flashing by her reflection, a pale, worried face against the gleaming backdrop of corporate Oakhaven. The Pendleton Tower grew larger and larger, a spire of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. When the car pulled into the private underground entrance, she felt a wave of imposter syndrome so strong it was dizzying. The lobby was a cathedral of modern capitalism. Soaring ceilings, polished marble floors that reflected the light like water, and a massive abstract sculpture that probably cost more than her apartment building. A woman with a sleek blonde bob and an impeccably tailored suit approached her, a warm but professional smile on her face. Ms. Sharma, I'm Eleanor Vance. It's a pleasure to meet you. Kate shook her outstretched hand. It was the same name from the letter. Up close, Eleanor looked to be in her late 40s, her eyes sharp and intelligent. There was a faint familial resemblance to Gregory in the set of her jaw, but her expression held none of his cruelty. Mr. Pendleton is waiting for you, Eleanor said, guiding her towards a private elevator. He's very much looking forward to your conversation. The elevator ascended, with a silent, breathtaking speed. There were no buttons, only a single keycard slot that Eleanor used. The doors opened directly into a vast corner office on the 50th floor. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the entire city. The space was furnished with a mix of classic art and minimalist modern furniture. It was opulent, but tasteful, a room that whispered power rather than shouting it. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was a man looking out over the city. He was tall and wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit that bespoke quiet, astronomical expense. As he turned around, Kate's breath caught in her throat. The face was older, less weathered by hardship, and more defined by age and authority. The cloud of untamed white hair was now neatly combed. The tired, shuffling posture was gone, replaced by an easy, confident stance. But the eyes were unmistakable. They were the same sharp, intelligent blue that had looked at her across the dining room of the Gilded Spoon. It was him, the old man in the worn tweed coat. "Ms. Sharma," he said, and the voice was no longer raspy from the cold, but a rich, calm baritone. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Kate stood frozen, her mind struggling to reconcile the 2 images. The frail, dismissed man and this powerful titan of industry standing before her. They were the same person. The realization hit her not like a gentle wave, but like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. "You," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "You were at the restaurant." Arthur Pendleton smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "I was. I do apologize for the deception. It's a personal tradition of mine. Please," he gestured again to one of the plush leather chairs facing his desk. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Numbly, Kate walked to the chair and sat down, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. She was in the office of one of the richest men in the world, a man she had defended, a man whose true identity was the most unbelievable paradox she could have ever imagined. The whole world had just been turned upside down, and she was sitting right at the epicenter of the quake. Kate sat rigidly in the leather chair, her hands clutching her purse in her lap. Her mind was a whirlwind, trying to connect the dots between the shabby old man being denied a table and the impeccably dressed billionaire who owned the city's most prominent skyscraper. It felt like a dream, a bizarre, high-stakes fever dream. Arthur Pendleton settled into the chair behind his massive desk, but he didn't hide behind it. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished wood, creating an atmosphere of intimacy despite the grandeur of the room. "I imagine you have a great many questions," he began, his blue eyes studying her with a kindly intensity. I don't understand," Kate managed her voice, barely a whisper. Why were you dressed like that? Why were you at the Gilded Spoon?" Arthur sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "An old habit, a test of sorts. When you build something as large as Pendleton Global, you become insulated. People treat you not as a person, but as a concept. A walking bank account. They tell you what you want to hear. Their kindness is calibrated to your net worth. It's disillusioning." He paused, gazing out the window at the sprawling city below. "So from time to time, I shed the skin of Arthur Pendleton. I put on an old coat, and I go out into the world, into my own businesses, to see what they're really like. I visit my hotels, my stores, my restaurants. I want to see the character of the people who work for me when they don't know who I am. I want to see if the values I espouse from this office, integrity, respect, compassion, have actually trickled down to the ground floor." Most of the time, he added, his voice tinged with melancholy they have not. The Gilded Spoon, he explained, was part of a portfolio of high-end hospitality venues his company had acquired 2 years prior. He had read the internal reports, seen the profit margins, but he wanted to feel the place for himself. "And I did," he said, his gaze returning to Kate. "I felt the cold, transactional nature of it. I saw the judgment, the disdain. And then, Ms. Sharma, I saw you." He leaned back, a flicker of genuine admiration in his eyes. "You had no reason to help me. In fact, you had every reason not to. You saw your manager coming. You knew the risk. Your colleague at the door was already turning me away. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to simply look away and get on with your work. But you didn't." Kate felt a flush creep up her neck. She had just been trying not to feel like a terrible person. She hadn't imagined the consequences would reverberate all the way to this office. "You spoke up," he continued. "You defended the dignity of a stranger at great personal cost. I watched you sacrifice your livelihood for a principle. In all my years, Miss Sharma, I have found that true integrity is not what someone does when they are being watched by the powerful, but what they do when they believe they are only being watched by the powerless. You in that moment showed more character than I have seen in most boardrooms." He let the words hang in the air, allowing their weight to settle. Kate could only stare at him, speechless. "Which is why I have brought you here," Arthur said, his tone shifting from reflective to purposeful. "I was profoundly disappointed by what I saw in Gregory Vance. He represents a sickness in business, a sycophantic worship of wealth, and a callous disregard for basic humanity. I am in the process of rectifying that. But your actions have inspired something new." He slid a handsome leather-bound portfolio across the desk towards her. "I am launching a new arm of the Pendleton Foundation. Its sole purpose will be to promote and invest in ethical business practices. We will create programs for employee welfare, community outreach, and corporate accountability. It will be a watchdog, a support system, and an incubator for a new, more compassionate kind of capitalism." He tapped the portfolio. "I am not offering you a job as a waitress, Ms. Sharma. I am offering you the position of program director for this new initiative. I want the person who made that stand in that restaurant to be the one helping to shape its mission. I want your integrity, your perspective, your voice at the heart of this endeavor." Kate's jaw dropped. "Program director." It didn't sound real. The words floated in the air, nonsensical and beautiful. She slowly reached out and opened the portfolio. Inside were preliminary mission statements, budget projections, with staggering numbers and a formal job description. The listed salary made her feel faint. It was more than she would have made in 10 years at the Gilded Spoon. "But I have no experience," she stammered. "I just have a high school diploma and a history of waiting tables. I'm not qualified." "You are more qualified than any MBA graduate I know," Arthur countered firmly. "I can hire people with experience in finance and management. I have dozens of them. What I cannot hire, what is impossible to teach, is innate moral courage. That you have in abundance. We will provide you with all the training and support you need. Your assistant Eleanor is the best in the business. Your primary qualification is your character. That is non-negotiable." He then softened his expression. "I also took the liberty of looking into your circumstances. I am aware of your brother Sam and his medical condition." He pushed a single sheet of paper towards her. It was a letter from Oakhaven's top medical center. "The Pendleton Foundation will be covering all of Sam's medical expenses, including securing him an appointment with Dr. Alistair Finch, the leading specialist in his field. All of it. Retroactively, and for as long as he needs treatment. This was the moment Kate broke. The dam of composure she had maintained throughout this surreal encounter burst. A sob escaped her lips, and tears of shock relief and overwhelming gratitude streamed down her face. This man wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her her brother's future. He was offering her a lifeline from a world of suffocating debt and fear. "Thank you," she cried, the words thick and clumsy. "I don't know what to say. Thank you." Arthur simply nodded, giving her a moment to compose herself. "The world needs more people like you, Kate. I'm just putting you in a position where you can make a bigger difference." After a few minutes, once Kate had regained some semblance of composure, a sharp knock came at the door. Eleanor Vance entered. "He's here, Mr. Pendleton," she said, her face impassive. "Send him in," Arthur replied, his voice suddenly taking on an edge of steel. The door opened wider, and in walked Gregory Vance. He was dressed in his best suit, his hair slicked back, a look of nervous excitement on his face. He had clearly been told he was being summoned for a major career opportunity. He saw Arthur Pendleton behind the desk, and his face lit up with an almost comical eagerness. He hadn't yet seen Kate, who was sitting slightly to the side. "Mr. Pendleton, sir, an absolute honor. Gregory Vance. I'm the general manager of one of your properties, the Gilded Spoon," he gushed, striding forward with his hand outstretched. Arthur ignored the hand. "I know who you are, Mr. Vance. I was in your restaurant last Tuesday." Gregory's smile froze. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Sir, I don't recall. We would have rolled out the red carpet had we known you were gracing us with your presence." "Oh, I'm quite sure you would have," Arthur said dryly. He then gestured towards Kate. "I believe you know Ms. Sharma." Gregory's head snapped in her direction. The blood drained from his face. He looked at Kate sitting in a chair in Arthur Pendleton's office, and then back at Arthur, and the horrifying realization began to dawn on him. His confident posture melted into a puddle of dread. I don't," he stammered, his mind clearly racing to fabricate a story. "Save it," Arthur cut in his voice, cold as ice. "I was the old man in the tweed coat, the vagrant you instructed your waitress to throw out, the man whose dignity you were so willing to sacrifice to appease your wealthy clientele." Gregory turned a sickly shade of green. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. "You, Mr. Vance, represent everything I despise," Arthur continued, his voice low and dangerous. "Your sycophantic behavior, your cruelty, your complete lack of principle. You are a disgrace to the Pendleton name. Which brings me to Eleanor." He gestured to his assistant. "Mr. Vance, meet my executive assistant." "Your cousin." If it were possible, Gregory grew even paler. He looked at Eleanor, who stared back at him with an expression of cool disappointment. "Eleanor informed me of your character flaws years ago," Arthur said. "I believe her exact words were, 'a petty tyrant who kisses up and kicks down.' I wanted to see for myself. You did not disappoint." "Mr. Pendleton." "I can explain," Gregory finally croaked. "There is nothing to explain. You are fired, and you will find that your reputation for toadying to the rich at the expense of human decency will precede you. The hospitality industry in this city is smaller than you think. Eleanor, please, have security escort Mr. Vance from the building." Gregory stood utterly defeated, his ambition and arrogance stripped away to reveal the pathetic, fearful man beneath. As security guards appeared at the door to lead him away, his eyes met Kate's one last time. In them she saw not anger, but a look of pure, unadulterated shock and a dawning understanding of the cosmic justice that had just been delivered. The reckoning was complete. And as the door closed, leaving her alone with Arthur Pendleton, once more, Kate knew her new life was about to begin. The first few weeks in her new role felt like learning to breathe a different kind of air. Kate moved from a world of grease-splattered aprons and aching feet to one of boardrooms, strategic plans, and catered lunches. The 50th floor of Pendleton Tower, which had initially seemed so intimidating, began to feel like a space of boundless possibility. Eleanor Vance, despite her familial connection to the disgraced Gregory, became Kate's indispensable guide and steadfast ally. She was the epitome of efficiency and professionalism, but beneath her polished exterior was a dry wit and a deep-seated belief in the Foundation's mission. "My cousin Gregory has always been a disappointment," she told Kate over coffee one morning. "He chose the path of least resistance. You, on the other hand, chose the path of most character. It's far more interesting to work with." Eleanor patiently walked Kate through corporate protocols, helped her craft emails, and sat with her for hours explaining budget sheets and grant proposals until the dizzying array of numbers started to make sense. Kate's first major project was a direct result of her experience at the Gilded Spoon. She named it the Dignity First Initiative. Its goal was to create a new standard for customer service training in all of Pendleton Global's hospitality venues. It moved beyond the usual script of "the customer is always right" and focused on empathy, de-escalation, and empowering employees to make compassionate judgment calls without fear of reprisal. She spent days visiting the kitchens, laundry rooms, and staff break areas of hotels and restaurants, not as a director from on high, but as someone who knew what it was like to be on the front lines. She listened to the concerns of housekeepers, dishwashers, and servers, the invisible workforce that kept the polished facade of luxury intact. She heard stories of mistreatment, of being ignored, of feeling disposable. Each story fueled her determination. With Arthur's full backing, she implemented changes that were small on paper, but monumental in practice. She established anonymous reporting channels for staff mistreatment, created a bonus system that rewarded teams for positive customer feedback, specifically mentioning kindness and respect, and rolled out mandatory training sessions for all managers' sessions that she herself co-led. During one of these sessions, a skeptical hotel manager, a man cut from the same cloth as Gregory, challenged her. "With all due respect, Ms. Sharma, you want us to prioritize feelings over efficiency. That's not how you run a profitable business." Kate stood before the room of seasoned managers, no longer the timid waitress, but a woman who had found her voice. "With all due respect, sir," she replied, her tone even and firm. "You are mistaken. You don't run a profitable business by treating people as disposable. You do it by building loyalty. Loyalty from customers who feel seen and respected, and loyalty from staff who feel valued and safe. A happy, respected employee will do more for your brand than $1 million marketing campaign. I know because I used to be one. And I know what it feels like when the opposite is true." A hush fell over the room. Her authority didn't come from her title. It came from her truth. Simultaneously, the most profound changes were happening in her personal life. The day she accompanied Sam to his first appointment with Dr. Alistair Finch was the day the last vestiges of her old fear finally dissolved. Dr. Finch, a brilliant and compassionate physician, outlined a new, cutting-edge treatment plan, his confidence a soothing balm on years of anxiety. For the first time, they were not talking about just managing Sam's condition, but about the real possibility of long-term remission. Seeing the hope return to her brother's eyes was a greater reward than any salary or title. They were able to move out of their cramped, rundown apartment into a bright, spacious place in a better neighborhood, with a room that Sam converted into a dedicated study. He was thriving in his online courses, no longer hampered by the constant worry of being a financial burden. The shadow of the illness was still there, but it was no longer the all-consuming darkness it had once been. One afternoon, about 3 months into her new job, Kate found herself walking past the Gilded Spoon. It was lunchtime. A new sign was in the window, advertising a new management, new philosophy relaunch. Curiosity got the better of her, and she peeked inside. The ambiance was different. It was still elegant, but the air felt lighter, less stuffy. She saw Professor Henderson sitting at his regular corner table, smiling and chatting with a server. The new manager, a woman promoted from within, was helping a busboy clear a table, her demeanor collaborative and kind. As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the polished glass of the door. She saw a woman she barely recognized. She was wearing a stylish but professional dress, her hair was cut in a chic bob, and she carried a leather briefcase. But the most significant change was in her eyes. The weariness was gone, replaced by a clear, calm confidence. The haunted look of a person perpetually on the brink of financial ruin had vanished. She thought back to that rainy Tuesday, to the moment she had defied Gregory. It was a single, terrifying act of rebellion, an act that should have destroyed her. Instead, it had rebuilt her entire world. It had led her here to a life of purpose, to a future where her brother was safe, to a position where her single act of kindness could now ripple outwards, touching thousands of other lives. Arthur Pendleton had been wrong about one thing. He had said he wanted to put her in a position to make a bigger difference. But the truth was, the difference had already been made in that one small moment. He had simply given her a bigger canvas to paint on. Her life was a testament to the unexpected, extraordinary power of a single person taking a stand not for a reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And as she walked away from the restaurant that had once been her prison, she did so with the profound understanding that her new dawn had been born, not in the light of a billionaire's offer, but in the darkness of a moment when she chose her own integrity over everything else. Catherine Sharma's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't defined by our job title or our bank account, but by the choices we make when no one important is watching. One act of courage, one stand for dignity, had the power to unravel a life of hardship and weave a new one of purpose and hope. It shows that integrity is a currency more valuable than money, and compassion is the most powerful investment we can ever make. If this story of unexpected justice and the incredible power of character moved you, please give this video a like and share it with others who might need a reminder that doing the right thing can change the world, even if it's just your own. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible true-to-life stories that will inspire and amaze you. Thank you for listening.